Hello, I'm Phil Mullen, energy psychotherapist. In a recent short video, I talked about quantum-like aspects of mind. And in this short talk here, I'm going to focus a little bit more on a particular aspect of this, the importance of, in psychotherapy, listening from superposition, which is a term borrowed from the quantum level, the quantum subatomic particle level. And essentially, its meaning here, in my context, is a number, all kinds of meanings, potential meanings, can coexist at one time. And the importance of listening in a way that allows that quasi-quantum wave of meaning to unfold in its own way, and not prematurely to collapse that wave of meaning into a particular meaning or a particular focus. So let's look at this a bit more. So I talked about this more in the previous video, but at the quantum level, subatomic level, all the seemingly very strange features of the quantum level of reality follow from the discovery that subatomic events are both particles and waves. It's not anything actually waving. It's more of a wave-like pattern that emerges when particles, whether of light or some other subatomic particles, are directed through two narrow slits. They form a wave-like pattern on the receiving plate, as if they were waves, like water, waves of water passing through two narrow slits. They'd form the same sort of pattern, interference pattern, constructive and destructive interference. And the weird thing is, this happens even if you direct one photon or particle at a time towards these two slits that are close together. And you don't know which slit they go through, but cumulatively they form this interference pattern. And where it gets very strange is that whether or not an interference pattern emerges depends on whether the human observer has knowledge of which slit they go through. So if a measurement is taken that detects which slit the particle has gone through, you don't get an interference wave pattern emerging. If you don't take a measurement, the particles form an interference pattern. And that's very, very strange, that what kind of pattern emerges depends on human knowledge of which slit they might go through. It gets even weirder if you have a measuring device. So the measuring device which would stop the interference pattern, but then the information that the measuring device has created is subsequently deleted, so that it's taken a measurement, but no human observer can know that information. You get the interference pattern back again. So somehow human awareness, human consciousness interacts with what emerges at the quantum level and fixes it into a fixed particle-like, point-like outcome. If human consciousness is not interacting, then you get a wave-like pattern. It's all spread out. So that's a very curious feature of the quantum level. So human observation determines what happens. The production of a wave-like or a particle-like pattern depends on whether a human being has knowledge of the path through the slit. Strange. So human consciousness kind of selects what emerges, what we can observe from the quantum field. Henry Stapp, a physicist who's contributed a lot to thinking about the implications of the quantum realm, he argues that consciousness is somehow primary, and that consciousness selects our own brain state from moment to moment, selects a brain state from myriad possibilities, just as it seems if we're measuring what emerges at the quantum subatomic level, we are in a sense selecting from a whole range of possibilities and probabilities. So the quantum wave is thought of as not a literal wave, but like a mathematical wave, a probability wave. It's a field of probability about where a particle might be. But it only works as an evolving wave so long as human consciousness does not interact to collapse the wave into a particular outcome. If you like, if human consciousness is not petrifying it, turning it into stone, into something solid. So Stapp's idea is that consciousness is continually selecting our brain states from all the possible brain states. And physicist Richard Amoroso also proposed that consciousness can, in certain ways, in certain contexts, select a brain state and its contents from another person. So that's a bit alarming, isn't it? But a more familiar formulation of such a process is the common idea that a person can be given a bad name or viewed in a certain negative way, with the result that, without a conscious intention to do so, the person will start to behave in a way that confirms the image. Similar interactions within the psychoanalytic frame have been described by concepts such as projective identification and the concept of role responsiveness by the Sandlers. And it seems to me that the patient too may quantum select responses from the analyst that fit and confirm their own fantasies and their inner models of the world. But that similarly, the analyst might quantum select brain states and contents from the analysand that confirm the analyst's expectations. That's my hypothesis. A process that could possibly take place. Now, of course, it's a matter of ordinary common observation that we are continually influenced by a group mind, that minds are not purely localized. They spread out, and there's a kind of group influence, a group energy field, a field of energy and thought. Fashions of all kinds, tastes in clothing, furnishings, music, politics, opinions, all manner of ways of being in the social world. And the idea of groupthink is now widely recognized as a serious danger in business and political organizations and in government. There have always been dominant figures whose minds influence those of others. The Hitler-Nazi phenomenon and its combined use of charisma, oratory, archetypal imagery, music, myth, and crowd emotion is a striking instance of this, but there are many. Charismatic religious meetings are another obvious example. And at the level of dyadic relationships, we can think of those malign patterns of manipulation known as coercive control, which can be very damaging indeed to the target person's mental state. Now, in the case of certain processes of healing, the influence of one person's mind upon another person's mind is intended to be benign and helpful. But there are other kinds of influence that are malign. And sometimes it seems that an entire personality development can be deformed by the influence of a dominant, controlling, undermining, or invalidating figure in childhood. Richard Amoroso, who I've mentioned, a physicist, refers to these as noetic effects, mind effects, since they are effects of mind. The dominant person's mind can invade that of another person, cutting that person off from their own access to a higher mind. So in this sort of way, one person can hijack another person's mind. And demagogues can do this to entire nations to varying extents. A related phenomenon is where a person's mind is captured and shaped by the perceptions of the other person. The psychologically more submissive person identifies with and becomes what the dominant figure perceives him or her to be. So identifying with the perception in the dominant figure's mind. Sometimes the recipient can identify with disavowed and projective aspects from the dominant one. This can happen between a parent and child or between an adult couple where one is the more dominant. It could also, regrettably, happen between a patient and a psychoanalyst, particularly if the latter holds to a strong and rigid theory, which the analysand then starts to identify with, enact, and thereby appear to validate. That's my hypothesis. Might not be true, but it's a hypothesis about what could go on. So the importance of listening from superposition. At the quantum realm, this is a state, this is really a cloud of probabilities where the position of its components is smeared out. It's not in any fixed place, smeared out like a smudged painting or a bit like those impressionist paintings. But if we interact with the quantum realm in order to measure it, the quantum wave collapses into a particular position. Now, good psychoanalytic listening corresponds to superposition, it seems to me. We're listening, but in a way that allows the wave-like and entropic nature of the patient's free associations to continue unfolding. Eventually, a clear particle of emotional content or meaning might come into focus, around which a whole load of meaning crystallizes. This will have a quality of being new and previously unknown. By contrast, if we're listening from a particular theoretical perspective, we're setting up boundary conditions that constrain what we can observe. What we find will then tend to confirm our theories. We might think we're listening to the patient, but really we are selecting certain contents from their psyche, which we mistakenly take as confirmation of a theoretical position. So when failing to listen from superposition, we tend to find what we expect. And since all psyches share a common origin and form part of a collective, then it is always possible to quantum select mental content that fits our expectations without realizing that that's what we're doing. And if the analyst adopts a suspicious stance towards the patient, looking for indications of destructive envy, grandiosity, wishes to destroy the analysis, blah, 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 as may occur in certain subcultures, these are what will tend to be found. And the curative process will then be viewed as one involving working through guilt and reparation within the depressive position. On the other hand, if the analyst adopts a stance of being open to seeing the patient's developmental strivings and is doing their best given the childhood and current circumstances, then the more positive and healthy aspects are likely to be evoked. It always seems to me that a stance that is most fully congruent with quantum realities is to view the patient as a sacred unknown other who might, if we prove trustworthy, reveal the emotional truth hidden within. Now, in this connection, we might like to note that whilst it's relatively easy to draw attention to a false self state of being, it's much more problematic to identify a true self. I think this is because the more authentic self is always unknown and evolving, in keeping with the quantum wave metaphor of development. So we need to keep the wave function of the emerging self open without observing it in such a way that it collapses into a particular formulation or identity. Now, in purely listening-based therapy, which I no longer do because my work is energy psychotherapy, but in purely listening-based therapy, the task is to be present, to listen and allow something to emerge and evolve. So in analogy with the quantum level, we might say the psychotherapist should indeed be listening from superposition, allowing the quantum wave of the unconscious mind to continue evolving and spreading, enabling new connections and patterns to emerge. And this will occur, providing we do not prematurely collapse the wave into a fixed particulate position in the form of a restrictive judgment, conclusion, formulation, or interpretation, all of which will select and capture a particular version of the analysand out of the myriad superposition possibilities. I'm emphasizing the value of free association, the spreading wave of free association. Dreams and superposition. Dreams, of course, are very important contents of the mind. They are in states of partial quantum superposition, combining many elements and meanings concurrently. They emerge from a higher or deeper dimensional space, which our brains cannot grasp in this space-time geometry that we inhabit. Dreams come from a different, a deeper or higher geometry, other dimensions that we simply cannot grasp in our waking consciousness. We can never retain the full dream for that reason, because it's in a different geometry of dimensions. It will not fit geometrically into our space-time, and its superposition of meanings cannot be communicated to self or other in linear language. The fragments of dreams recalled is like a collapsed wave that consciousness has selected. Nevertheless, free association to the dream can be a very productive route to a multiplicity of less conscious meanings. So it is helpful to listen from this stance of superposition, refraining from premature conclusions or crystallizations of meaning, allowing the waveform of the client's evolving unconscious communications to unfold unimpeded. We don't want to quantum select a version of the client that fits our theory. Okay, that's it. Thanks very much for listening.